the gun. Yeah, we might have jumped the gun about the Lions play calling. We might have jumped the gun about the Lions offense, because if what we just saw in this Sunday night game is any indication, this is an offense that is very much not back. We are going to talk all about that, but before we get into the meat and potatoes of today's show, welcome into I'll Say This. I am Chris Castellani. You can follow me on Twitter at Castellani2014. We are available on TikTok as well. If you're watching on YouTube, hit that like button. Hit that subscribe button. Let's get those watch hours up. Available in audio form on Apple Podcasts. Available in audio form on Spotify. And, of course, CastellaniContent.com is being updated every single day with the content that Austin and I create. That includes Lions postgame videos. You can rewatch all of the videos from this season as well as all the videos from last season, all in one place there on that site. So go ahead and check those out. All right, let's jump into it. Unfortunately, the Lions just lost to the Philadelphia Eagles in a snooze fest of a primetime game, 16-9, in a game that in many ways was not nearly as close as the score indicated. I would say that it was as manhandled as we've seen the Detroit Lions in any game since Dan Campbell became the head coach here. It was an admirable, even incredible performance by the defense to allow them to even be in this game. I mean, it is one of the great miracles of the universe that if not for a pretty weak defensive pass interference penalty at the end there, the Lions would have actually had a shot to drive down the field and tie this game. Now, they wouldn't have, right? And what we saw throughout this entire game indicates that. But it's still, it speaks to the job that Kelvin Shepard's done with this defense. I continue to be impressed. With their backs against the wall, with guys out, no Kirby Joseph again on Sunday, they continue to impress me. And it's not like they've been consistently given a lot to work with. They've been given a lot of short fields, and it feels like they've very rarely ever broken. They deserve a lot of credit, but that wasn't the story, unfortunately. The story was the fact that the Lions' offensive line got completely shoved into a locker. Jared Goff played as bad a game as we've ever seen him play, not just with the Lions, but probably with the Rams as well, probably going back to his rookie season where he was a disaster, right? Limited time to throw. When he did have time to throw, he was airmailing it, or guys were dropping passes, and now the Lions find themselves at 6-4, and I don't know if my pessimism reflects the pessimism of the rest of the fan base. I don't know how people are exactly feeling right now. Nobody's happy. Nobody likes to lose. But this was more than just one loss to me, because we're now 10 games in, and this game sort of changes how I feel about the rest of the campaign. I'm open about it, and I've been open about it last season. I thought they were going to win the Super Bowl. I thought last season, even with the injuries, I thought they were having a magic season. They were finding ways, even on games when guys were out, even on games where they didn't play well, like that Houston game on Sunday night, they were pulling games out of their ass. It was miraculous. That felt like the team, far and away, the best team in Detroit Lions history, the best offensive line in the league, one of the best play callers in football, who's now the head coach of the team that's in first place in this division. That team had everything. And I came into this season feeling a little bit more skeptical. And people were kind of wondering why. And I guess it was just because I felt like the last 2 years were their best shot. I didn't feel like the window was closed. I just felt like it was going to be a little bit less open. But then you got the win against Baltimore, and it felt like the offense after that Green Bay game started to figure things out again. And I was back on board. And sadly, after this Philadelphia game, I've come to the conclusion that my doubts coming into this season were very justified. And it starts with the fact that this is an offense that is very much built on rhythm. It's an offense that's built on timing. Jared Goff is not a guy that's going to roll out of the pocket and extend plays. You're not going to be running four verts with all your receivers, praying to God that he can find a spot in the open field and hit these guys. It's about three-step drops. The ball's going to be out. Good run plays, establishing a ground game. This team does not have an offensive line that's capable of doing that. They can do it against weaker opponents. We saw them do it against Washington, right, where they scored on every drive. But anytime this team plays a front seven that is worth a damn, they are going to get beat. And I'm sure that if you look through the history of the Super Bowl era, you could find somebody that either made it to or won the Super Bowl with a subpar offensive line. Generally speaking, if you don't have that, you don't have shit in this league. Okay, for 13 years, Matt Stafford took a beating. A Hall of Fame quarterback who might be in line to win an MVP this season took a beating and never won anything because you rarely ever gave him an offensive line that protected him. And I like Jared Goff a lot. Jared Goff isn't Matthew Stafford. Okay? And games like Sunday against Philadelphia really proved that. The offense was not in sync. They were completely out of rhythm. Outside of Jamison Williams, who had a nice game outside of that dumb penalty, Amon-Ra didn't play well, had a few drops. Of course, it stinks to be without Sam Laporta. That's a massive loss, not just in terms of his pass-catching capabilities, but in terms of how he protects Jared Goff in pass protection. That's a huge loss, and he's going to be out at least 3 more games. I get it. I mean, I like Brock Wright, but we know what a loss that is. That's a top-tier tight end. At the same time, this was an issue that we thought could be a thing coming into the season with Ragnow retiring. You've had a combination of regression and injuries and the loss of your play caller. Let's be honest. I mean, I'm not saying that the offensive line would be great, but I do think an elite play caller like Ben Johnson would probably have a better feel for how to get this thing off the ground, because there was never a second in that game where it felt like the offense had anything going. They hit 2 big pass plays on one drive, one of them being a touchdown to Jamison Williams. Besides that, maybe a first down here or there. Pretty much all of it was screen passes to Jahmyr Gibbs, and he had good blocking downfield. And guess what? Jahmyr Gibbs is an amazing player. But as amazing as he is, he couldn't get anything going on the ground game. You weren't running the ball effectively. You were completely one-dimensional. I would argue there was 0 dimension because you couldn't get a pass game going either. And that is entirely about what's going on in the trenches. And I don't know how this gets fixed. The offensive line, maybe they could get better. Guys can come back from injury, potentially. You've already gone through your trade deadline, right? And you didn't make any moves. And now you're kind of stuck with what you have. And it's frustrating because I genuinely felt over the last 2 seasons, at their best, the Lions were a team that could hoist the Lombardi. This is not a bad team. I still actually think this is a team that's probably going to find a way to win the division, because I don't totally believe in Chicago yet. At the same time, that lack of ability to protect their quarterback, and this some of this falls on Jared. Jared was terrible, right? And the fact is, he's not mobile at all, and that hurts his game. I get it, but those factors prevent me from thinking that this is a team who can do something that we've never seen a Lions team do before, which is such a shame because we felt that way over the last few years. One more thing I want to talk about is that as much as we love Dan Campbell, I don't think this was his finest hour either. Obviously got a ton of credit for the play calling duties against Washington. And look, he does deserve credit for that. He does a quick trigger, and the offense played great. This particular game, look, ever since Dan Campbell arrived in Detroit, he's been very true to his identity. And I praise him for that. He right away made people know that this team will not back down from anybody. They're not going to be afraid of anybody. We're going to be aggressive. We're going to take risks. We're going to go for it on 4th down. And, well, he likes to be portrayed in the media as this kind of riverboat gambler. For the most part, his 4th down decisions make sense. Like, analytically, if you have 4th and 2, odds are, well over 50% that you're going to get 2 yards and get a first down. Like, it makes sense. And we've seen a lot of teams in the league start to adopt that mentality. At the same time, this is what bothers me about analytics in football. This is still a game that's played by humans, and each game has a different feel to it and a different vibe. And I'm sure analytical nerds will say that there's no such thing as feel, that every play is the same. It's not. It's not. This was not a game where you should be airing it out and trying to go 44-45 against Philadelphia. This was like a Big Ten field position game. It was like Iowa, Wisconsin. All right, you got to take points when they're there. You got to take opportunities. You got to play the field position game, especially when you have a defense that's playing out of their minds. And it turned into the definition of insanity. You were trying to go for it on 4th down every time. It wasn't working, and the reason it wasn't working was mainly due to your offensive line. Either you were giving the ball to Gibbs and he was getting stuffed, or Goff was going back to pass completely out of rhythm and throwing the ball to nobody. You were getting completely punched in the mouth in the trenches. And that's ultimately what cost you this game, and I think that's ultimately what lowers the ceiling for this team. I don't think that this is going to be a team that can reach the heights that the teams over the last 2 years reach, and that's such a shame. But I can only go with what I saw, and what I saw is a team that is still quite good and will have good days, but against elite opponents has a really exploitable weakness.
Let's move on to the college ranks, and I do want to talk about the Pistons, and we will. But look, football reigns supreme. Even when the Tigers are rolling late in the year, I lead off with football stuff. So I'm not trying to intentionally keep you in suspense, but this is a football world, and we're living in it. And it gives me an opportunity to talk about the Michigan Wolverines, who pulled out another. I'm not going to say miraculous. You look at the stat sheet; they completely dominated this game, but a close, ugly win, one that we've grown painfully accustomed to in the Sharon Moore era. 24-22 Michigan win at Wrigley Field against Northwestern, a Dom Zavada field goal as time expired, won it for the Wolverines. And look, I try to be, I'm always honest, but I try to be reasonable with my praise and criticisms of my teams because I know what life is like watching a team that is pitiful. Whether it's the Tigers when they were at their worst, or the Lions, or even Michigan football at points. You don't want to overlook or discredit teams who are winning games, and I understand that. At the same time, my evaluation of Michigan football is significantly different than my evaluation of the other teams that I root for because Michigan football, to their credit, has and will always hold themselves to an extremely high standard. I find that fun in the same way that I'd find it fun if I was a New York Yankees fan where, yeah, look, 9 wins for a lot of programs, you're doing cartwheels, right? For this program, not so much. And I live in a world in which we have recently seen this program make it to the Big Ten championship, beat Ohio State, make the playoff. I've seen a team go 15-0 and win a natty, right? And I didn't expect that from this team. I think it was unreasonable expectations to believe that this was an 11-1, 12-0 team when you looked at the schedule. But when I watch them, there's a lot I don't like. And I don't think that I'm being nitpicky or greedy for wanting to see more. And I think it is a pretty big indictment on the team and a pretty big indictment on the coaching staff that we are almost 2 full years into the Sharon Moore era, and every game feels like the same exercise. Now, I will give them credit for this. Number one, on the stat sheet, like I said, they dominated the game. They almost doubled their yardage, right? Their quarterback in the first half was a million times better. They ran the ball better. But, even that comes with the negative side of things, which I will talk about in a second. I do want to point out one thing. We have very much maligned this receiving core over the last few years, and they have deserved a lot of that criticism. Regardless of how we felt about the quarterback situation, this has not been a receiving core that a Michigan football program should be putting out. They have stepped up. I said in the Purdue game, I thought they actually played one of their best games. Bryce was just missing guys. And against Northwestern, where it starts is the fact that Andrew Marsh had a historic day. 12 catches, 189 yards. That's a Michigan freshman receiving record. Good for him. And that's a true freshman who's going to be here for a while. That's a huge positive for this program. And despite all the ugliness and all the frustration, Bryce Underwood and the offense and the running game and the offensive line put together a drive at the end of that game that put them in range for Zavada to win it. And they had a 3rd and 10 in which they had to throw that sideline pass to Marsh, and he made an incredible play. There is still, and I'm not going to deny this, a level of physical and mental toughness that Sharon Moore teams have that's carried over from the Harbaugh era. They take a lot of body blows, and they are able to respond. I will give them that. And they're 8-2 because of that. With that said, when you look at everything that went on in this game, Michigan had a historic victory in the sense that they became the first team in the history of college football to win a game in which they had a -5 turnover differential. And if this was week 2, or if this was even halfway through year 1 of the Sharon Moore era, I'd feel a certain way. But we are kind of deep into this now. And the fact that every game feels like the same to a point where I'm honestly getting bored watching them just because I kind of know what to expect, I think is an indictment on the coaching staff. There's nothing that I saw on Saturday that looked any different from the team that I've seen in the first 9 games of this year and the team I saw throughout all of last year. What is frustrating is that for not just a brief minute, for 20 minutes in this game, it did look a little different. And this is where I got to give credit to the quarterback. The first 20 minutes of this game, Bryce balled out. He was accurate. He looked confident. I got to give credit to Chip Lindsey and Sharon Moore and the coaches for calling the right plays. They used the pass to set up the run, which is something they've never done. They put a lot of faith in their young quarterback, and he looked really good in the first third of the game. And had that continued over 60 minutes, I would have come on here and been much more positive because I felt like Michigan would have kind of started to break out of the one-dimensional offense that they've been running at a time in which Bryce Underwood has had his struggles over the last few games. But then in the second half, You saw a freshman quarterback look like a freshman quarterback. He made 2 brutal mistakes on the interceptions. I mean, these were classic freshman mistakes where you had a guy who was looking down the field for way too long. The secondary read his eyes, and then he just delivered passes right over the middle of the field into the arms of a defender. This is very obvious stuff. And the thing with Bryce, look, I've been very hard on him because in a lot of ways, I think the team's ceiling is dependent on him, which we knew coming into the year. Ultimately, guess Bryce is going to be fine. He's 18 years old. It is hard to come in as a true freshman at any program, let alone one that has the expectations that Michigan has, and thrive right away. Has he been better than I expected? No, I would argue up to this point, he's probably been a little bit worse than I thought he'd be. I thought he'd be a little bit more polished. I think he's more of a project than I expected, which scared me. But when I criticize Bryce, I'm criticizing him based on his performance this year. I still think there's a lot to be excited about. This is a very young roster that is currently led right now, because Jordan Marshall got injured, but hopefully he comes back, but is led right now by a true freshman quarterback and a true freshman wide receiver. It's hard to win in this league with that formula. Now, thankfully, they have a really good defense and a really good running back room, as banged up as it might be, and they've been able to kind of grind things out. So I don't want to make it seem like that I'm not a Bryce believer, but I've seen what I've seen through 10 games, and we'll see what we've seen through 11 games, and that will allow him to go against Ohio State, which is a team that's going to be a lot less forgiving. And that's kind of where it hangs in my head a little bit, because look, good to see Michigan win, glad they won, glad to see them at 8-2, but the mistakes that they have made really in every game outside of maybe Central, the mental mistakes, dumb penalties, turnovers, missed opportunities to extend drives, horrible special teams play, you have gotten away with it against the teams you've played. Whenever you've gone up against a team with a pulse like Oklahoma or USC, you've gotten beat pretty bad. And you cannot afford to make those same mistakes against Ohio State. And given the fact that you have a young quarterback and a young team, I feel like what Ohio State is going to do defensively is try to force Michigan into making those mistakes. And as we've seen through the first 10 games, they kind of can't avoid it. I don't know what the hell they're doing with the punt return stuff. I mean, the missed field goals is maddening, but I do think, Zavada's not losing his job. He's been very successful here. I think that Samaj Morgan is being put in a position where he's going to lose any ounce of confidence that he has in himself. I understand the guy's done some things here. He had a nice little freshman season. He is a awful punt returner, and even beyond that, the guy can't hold on to the ball right now. And Devin Gardner talked about this, and I tweeted it on Saturday. At a certain point, that falls on the coaching staff. You are putting a guy out there who probably should have lost his job about 6 weeks ago. Now, it seemed like, finally, towards the end of the game on Saturday, they went out and had Andrew Marsh returning punts. And unfortunately, in the first game of the season, people forget this, Andrew Marsh fumbled a kickoff return, and then after that had not really been used much on special teams. If that doesn't happen, maybe there is a little bit less trust being put in Samaj Morgan, but there's no way around it. He's actively hurt the team, and he seems like a good kid. I don't want to blame him for any of that, but it's really clear that it's just not working. I don't think that he has the body to be a legitimate wideout in the Big Ten, and I just don't think that he's instinctive enough or flashy enough to be an elite special teams player. And I don't want to spend so much time focusing on him, but social media has just been blasting him, and I've been kind of coy just because I think it's very easy to be the guy who hammers somebody when the whole world is hammering them. But found a way. And if that's good enough for you, it's good enough for you. I don't know if it's the shine from the 2023 championship still beaming in front of my face. Maybe that is a thing. Maybe that light hasn't gone out yet, because I feel like I should be more frustrated with this team. I feel like the fan base should be more frustrated with this team. And I'm telling you, I've been on this for weeks. How that Ohio State game goes is going to change everything. If you can find a way once again to miraculously win that game, one, every ounce of stability that Ohio State's built up since losing to Michigan last year is gone. I'm sorry. I mean, I see the way that they reacted to that game. And two, all of a sudden, Sharon Moore is toast of the town again. If you lose that game, all the goodwill from last year is dead from beating them. And you are assessing not the program you think you might have in the future, but the program you have right now, and that's one with a lot of question marks and an unproven coach. It's just the truth. And I'm not even I'm not a Sharon Moore hater in the sense that I don't think that he's ever going to be a good coach or that I think the guy's a complete loser. No, I mean, it's not the effort. But Michigan hired a coordinator, and I think there's a legit chance that coordinator just wasn't quite ready to be a head coach. We see it all the time in college football. We see it all the time in the NFL. But they have 2 more games to kind of flip that narrative. And if they flip the narrative, then I'm going to give Sharon a lot of credit because I didn't think there was a snowball's chance in hell that they were going to beat Ohio State last year, and they figured out a way to do it. You're not going to win ugly against them this year. Their defense is too good. Their offense is too good. They're historically good this season. You got to play a cleaner game. You got to hit some big plays. You got to run the ball. And we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. Obviously, Michigan still has to play Maryland next week, who I potential trap game, I get it. I don't trust Mike Locksley in the slightest to knock off Sharon Moore in this instance. So we'll talk about that next week. Michigan State played. Michigan State lost. I need to talk about this game. I think there's diehard Michigan State fans that barely watch this thing, and I don't blame them. Here's what I'll say about Michigan State. I think that Jay Batt and the athletic department believes that they're doing the right thing by waiting to the end of the season and then having the discussions about Jonathan Smith and most likely firing Jonathan Smith. And I understand that. I understand believing that, there's a way to go about this. And, okay, he hasn't technically lost the team. Be righteous with it and we can kind of, handle it humanely. I get that. But this is a marriage that's so far past its expiration date that it makes me wonder why you're even taking the field. Maybe it's hyperbolic. I think this is the worst Michigan State team I've ever seen. I mean, there's pillars of Michigan State football that even some of their bad teams have had. Even that 3-9 team with D'Antonio in 16, at least they played Michigan kind of tough. This team is undisciplined and untalented and poorly coached. And Miljovic, who was one of the bright spots for them in the Minnesota game, every time the guy went to pass, there's the 4 guys in the backfield. And then you're down by 18 late in the game. The guy's taking a beating. His brain is about to be turned into tapioca pudding, and you keep him out there. It's just, in the first half of the season, we knew Michigan State was bad, but we wanted to see when the point was where you knew everyone was going to be out on Jonathan Smith. That came against UCLA. That was like a month and a half ago, and he's still there. Look, they can do what they want, and ultimately, look, I'm a Michigan fan, so I don't really care. But if they hold on to him, or if they think there's any juice that can be squeezed from this rag, I think they are making a serious, serious mistake. I think this program is so completely dead under his leadership right now. And if Jay Batt, who is a recently hired AD, doesn't pull the trigger and let him go either before the season or at the end of the season, then I think Michigan State fans will turn on him too, because they see what we see. And we can have a legitimate discussion one day about what the ceiling of Michigan State football can be, and I think in the modern age especially, that's a fair discussion to be had. At the same time, they can absolutely and should absolutely be better than this. This is back-to-back senior days in which the place has been like 30% full. This is a senior class at Michigan State that has not played in a bowl game. It's rough. That's a tough one to explain. I don't even know why I'm like angry about it. It's just the lack of any sort of competence within that program it's pretty stunning to me right now. All right, for the first time on I'll Say This, at least this season, we talked about them in the playoffs. Let's talk about the Detroit Pistons. Nay, let's talk about the red-hot Detroit Pistons. The 11-2 Detroit Pistons, number 1 team in the Eastern Conference right now. They have won 9 in a row. This is the best start they've had in a season in 20 years. I remember that season 20 years ago. They won 64 games in 06. That was the year they had 4 All-Stars. Should have won the championship, but they ran into Dwayne Wade in the Eastern Conference Finals, and he went nuts. But that was regular season-wise the best team in Pistons history. Look, here's what I'll say about it, and I don't want to spend every single week of this show talking about the frustration I have with the NBA, because at the end of the day, this is a Detroit team, and I've been open about the fact that I want to see Detroit teams do well, and it would be nonsensical, especially considering how successful they've been up to this point, for me not to talk about them. It is a wonderful story. Last year was the best Pistons season since 2008, and they finally won a few playoff games and got that monkey off their back. That's awesome. But you did wonder how they were going to come into this campaign. And I don't think you could ask for a better start. And really where it starts is the fact that you not only have a Batman, but you have a Robin. In a lot of ways, the entire team is worth watching for Cade Cunningham. I mean, this is a 5-tool guy. He's a stat sheet stuffer. He's a phenomenal scorer and passer. And, I understand he's had a few games where his efficiency numbers haven't looked great. I get that. But with a team like this, I want my best player taking shots. Sorry. And if that means that he's going to be missing a lot but still going for 46, so be it. I know that in the next game he's going to be significantly more efficient. He's going to get rebounds. He's going to get assists. But you also have Jalen Duren, who has emerged as a legitimate big man. And while, isn't necessarily a guy that's going to be elite off the dribble, that's a great tandem to have. And the guy's going to be fantastic on the offensive and defensive glass as well. You have finally, after 2 decades of kind of twiddling your thumbs, developed from within with homegrown players. And it's not just Cade. It's Thompson. And it's Jalen Duren. And that is fantastic. And you've done a pretty good job in free agency. And they had a miraculous win against the Wizards where Dennis Jenkins, who, man, it shows what I barely heard of this guy, hit a 3 at the buzzer that he didn't even want to take. The play was written up for Duncan Robinson, which makes sense. Obviously, he's an elite 3-point shooter. He gets the ball on the sideline, literally looks around to try to find somebody else who he can pass it to, makes a 3. We end up going to overtime. Pistons win, right? Those are the kind of contributions they've gotten. And then I tune into their next game against the Bulls thinking, all right, here we go. And they're without their best players. No Duren, no Cade. And I'm thinking to myself, here we go. And they won the Bulls game, and they won the 76ers game, not just with their B team, but with their C team. I mean, I'm not going to say they were playing with scrubs, but, you would assume any game without Cade Cunningham on the floor was probably going to be a loss, and they found a way to win. This is something I've talked about with the Lions in the past. Playing with injured players or playing with a depleted roster is not something that I think is ever sustainable over a full season, right? And Cade and these guys will come back, right? These aren't major injuries. But the fact that they're able to win some of these games on nights when they're unable to have their best roster on the floor, those are culture wins. And I know I speak about culture all the time, probably to a point where it becomes a little bit excessive, but I've seen years where the Pistons had serviceable rosters and weren't able to beat bad teams. And it's not just that next man up mentality that people constantly talk about. It's getting these guys to buy in and believing that they can fill in. I mean, obviously, on paper, next man up exists for everybody. Guy gets injured, another guy comes up. That's how the world of sports works. But it's getting these guys to play together, play legitimate basketball, make their outside shots, and even beyond that, play some legitimate defense. Down the stretch in some of these games, they've tightened things up. In the fourth quarter, in overtime against Washington, these are basic things that we had not seen from Detroit prior to JB Bickerstaff's arrival. And they believe. Similar to the Tigers, I don't know how long this can last. I think this is obviously a playoff team and a team that's going to have some pretty high hopes. Will they be a team that's going to remain at the top of the Eastern Conference all year? I don't know. Time will tell. And part of that is just my lack of knowledge of the NBA, and part of it is just the fact that it's been so long since we've seen the Pistons at the top. I mean, look, last year they made the postseason. It was wonderful, but the Detroit Pistons have not been considered one of the NBA's elite in 18 years, right? In 08 was the last time that they lost in the conference finals with that core. So it's a much different NBA. It's new territory, but it is undeniably exciting. They are doing the number one thing that you want for any team in the early part of their season, which is that they have made themselves interesting. We've gone through this exercise with the Tigers. It is brutal when you start a season in April and the team is already 10 games back by May. Or the Lions when they're awful starting seasons 0-3 or 1-4 and you feel like there's really nothing else to play for. The Pistons, with the way they've started, have established themselves as a team that is going to be playing 82 games of meaningful basketball in the regular season this year. We have rarely been able to say that over the last 2 decades, and that is incredibly exciting and a testament to these players and these coaches who've done a wonderful job turning around the culture here. Let's talk a little college hoops here, as Michigan and Michigan State both ended this week unscathed. Michigan very close to losing really both the games that they played, but they survived against Wake Forest. They survived against TCU. What I'm about to say is not meant to disparage Michigan State in the slightest, okay? Right now, I think Michigan is the more interesting team in the state That does not mean that they are going to end up being the better team in this state. But when you have a coach like Tom Izzo and you have a system like what he runs, I have generally a pretty good idea of what their floor is in a season. They'll be a tournament team, right? I talked about it last week. There's going to need to be the development of some outside shooting. Some free throws were an issue against San Jose State. Did not play their best game against San Jose State. You could tell Izzo was not particularly happy with them. A San Jose State team that wasn't any good, and you could tell they were wildly undersized. And Michigan State was able to pull away and did dominate on the glass. And you had a monster game by Jackson Kohler rebounding the ball. You know, they're playing fine, and they're going to have another test at Madison Square Garden this week against Kentucky. We can go back and forth about whether or not Izzo overdoes it with the non-conference schedules, but you can't tell me that we don't learn a lot about these teams, at least in the early part of their campaign, when they go up against some of these legitimate opponents. We have a pretty good idea of who Kentucky is. They're pretty darn good. A team that we aren't totally sure of right now is Michigan, and not only Michigan, but the teams that Michigan has played. Look, there's a chance, again, I don't know, because college basketball is weird. There's a chance we look back at the end of this season and say, man, you know what? The Wake Forest and TCU wins, they were grinds, but those were quality wins. You know, I think especially Wake Forest. I think Wake Forest could legitimately be a solid squad, and even if you're not making the tournament, you see bubble teams upset tournament teams all the time in the regular season. You know, you got to grind it out. The TCU game was on the road. There are very admirable things that I'm seeing from Michigan right now. I think people are very down on them despite the 3-0 start. Expectations have a lot to do with that. I understand. I get that completely. But I think they look a million times better defensively. They've won the games, and I understand they were close and they were frustrating, but you know they lost a lot of those kind of 50-50 games down the stretch a year ago. And now they won quite a few of them in the early part of the season. But you remember last year they lost to Oklahoma. They lost to Arkansas. They lost to Wake Forest. I mean, those were 3 non-conference losses that could have easily been wins. They found a way to get it done in the early part of this campaign against those Power 4 schools. At the same time, I think what has Michigan fans kind of worried is that in the early part of this campaign, the issues that we're seeing are the same issues that bothered us a year ago, and it starts with turnovers. Under year one, or in year one with a new coach, everything is new, and it's hard for me to take what happened in year one and believe that it's going to last into years 3, 4, 5, and 6. All right. I understand that we live in an age where you can bring in people in the portal and everything and overhaul your rosters. I get it, and Michigan had a good team last year. But when it's a first year for a head coach, it's new for everyone. The facilities are new. The ride-in is new. The teams you're preparing to play are new. The coaches are new. It's completely different. And some things can happen in year one that don't carry over. Michigan was a mess with the turnovers a year ago. And I think a lot of that was the pace they play at. A lot of that was sloppiness, and I think in the early part of the season especially, some of that was lack of familiarity with each other. This year, we're seeing those same problems in the early part of the season, which is exceptionally frustrating. But I think what has people very concerned is that they look like the exact same squad from a year ago, which, hey, look, last year's squad made the Sweet 16. You could do a lot worse. But people who watch college basketball or just know anything about basketball at all know the fact that you can get by in some of these games, maybe against lesser opponents, but if you want to be a big-time basketball team and win a lot of games, you cannot be turning the ball over at the rate that Michigan has been turning the ball over at. And I think this team's going to get way better. I think they're going to improve a lot. I think that they're going to have scores. I think the shooting will figure itself out. I know that the last 2 games they didn't shoot the basketball particularly well, but I know they have shooters. Namari can shoot, and Cheddar can shoot, and Trey McKinney coming off the bench looks like he's going to be able to shoot. There's still a lot to like. The interior defense is excellent. So I think the shooting will figure itself out. What has me really concerned, and it was something that was sort of, talked about in the offseason. Trey Donaldson was a pretty good point guard for Michigan a year ago. I think he frustrated Dusty May because he was very much a score-first point guard in an offense that had plenty of scorers, but he hit some huge shots. A lot of turnovers, too. A lot of sloppiness, and trust me, he would have his off nights, but pretty good player. He got a bag to play in Coral Gables. He's now at the University of Miami. And Michigan went out and got Elliot Cadeau, who is a polarizing player that, if my Twitter feed says, tells the truth at all, was not particularly popular when he was at UNC. When you watch this guy play early on in the season, it feels like there's a bit of a round peg and a square hole element to how he fits in this offense. What Dusty wants out of his point guards in this offense is facilitators. It's passers. It's guys who can slash, who can dish it out. And of course, look, if the guy can score, the guy can score. That's great. It's one more scorer on the floor. I don't think it's a necessity. What is a necessity is that if you want to run this offense, you need to play a very clean floor game. 3 games in, my overreaction, and part of this goes back to his time at UNC as well, I don't know if Elliot Cadeau was able to do that. And if that's the case, you fall into the same issue that you fell into a year ago, which is the fact that you don't really have a backup point guard. And, I got to give a shout out to Greg Waddell of Sleepers Media, who talked about this before the season. I think there is a future, and we're a long ways away. But if the turnover woes continue with Elliott at the 1, the closest thing you have to a backup point guard might be Axel Lendeborg. And it was subtle, but there were a few possessions there in the second half of that game against TCU where he was bringing the ball up court. Look, could you give Trey McKinney a shot at the 1? Maybe. You put a freshman out there. I can't imagine he's going to be any less erratic than Cadeau might be. But it's definitely something to look out for. I think the talent will figure itself out. I think the team chemistry will figure itself out. I know how good of a coach Dusty is. That's the one area to look out for because Michigan seemed pretty content with letting Trey Donaldson go because they felt like they were getting a point guard that was going to be better suited to run that offense. If that's not the case, then you're essentially a football team that's really good but doesn't have a good quarterback. And if what we've seen in this state is any indication, that's an uphill battle, and it's something to look out for. All right. Anything else to discuss here? No, I think we covered it all today, starting with the Lions. And, it's a good time of year. I think we're kind of getting out of that dark time where baseball's over, college hoops picking up, NFL picking up, everything's, and obviously the Pistons have played phenomenal as well, and we're going to continue to talk about that. So that will do it for today's show. You can follow me on Twitter at Castellani2014. If you're watching on YouTube, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. Let's get those watch hours up. We are available in audio form on Apple Podcasts. We're available in audio form on Spotify. And, of course, CastellaniContent.com is getting updated pretty much every day with the content that Austin and I create. That includes episodes of I'll Say This and Chris and Company, which should be back here pretty soon as well. Continue to appreciate all the support as we grind through an interesting time of year. Got about a month plus trying to finish this year strong. Really looking forward to it, and we appreciate all the love that you guys continue to show Austin and I. It does not go unnoticed. So we will be back soon. Appreciate all of you. Have a great rest of your week. Peace and happiness.